Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kishore Bamidipati, and I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Model N. I welcome you to our webinar titled Deliver 2 to 3% top-line growth with global pricing, discount, and volume control. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Mr. Hanan Greenberg is the General Manager and Vice President of High-Tech Business at Model N, and Ms. Jennifer Channel is a Senior Solution Consultant at Model N. Over the past 10 years, Mr. Greenberg has engaged with more than 50 semiconductor companies in the U.S., Europe, Japan, and Korea to assist in their sales operations with pricing and margin improvement initiatives. He has authored several white papers on CRM, global price management, and revenue management. Before joining Model N, Mr. Greenberg was the founder and CEO of Privia Incorporated, where he worked for 6 years with top 20 government contractors, including Boeing and Lockheed, to improve their business development and government bidding processes. Prior to that, Mr. Greenberg served for 7 years as CEO of Click Online, which developed multimedia products for high-tech OEM manufacturers. Ms. Jennifer Channel is a Senior Solution Consultant at Model N. She has had a variety of roles in the company in the 14 years that she's been here. Prior to Model N, Jennifer worked at Arrow and Avnet, among others. With that introduction, I'd like to turn it over to Hanan.
Thank you, Kishore, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Today's presentation is about delivering 2 to 3% top growth with global pricing, discount control, and volume control. In the next slide, in the agenda that we prepared for you today, basically we'll give a quick overview of Model N for those of you who are unfamiliar with our company, and then we will dive into what is the current outlook for 2016 and how companies can beat the market. We'll focus on where is money being left on the table, where is money actually lost, and propose some strategies to improve top-line performance, setting aside the obvious, which is winning more business. And then we will hand over to Jen, who will walk you through a demonstration of how some of those strategies can actually be put into practice, and then we will finalize with a quick session of Q&A. So with that, let's get started with a quick overview of Model N. For those of you who are not familiar, Model N is a 16-year-old company in Silicon Valley, software company, focused on serving the high-tech space and life sciences space. In high-tech, our customers that you can see on this slide are a pretty wide variety, both in terms of size and business focus. If you were to remove 2 companies from this slide, which are Microsoft and VMware, then virtually everyone else on this slide is in the semiconductor and component manufacturing business. And in this space, we have worked with companies both in different product lines, ranging from highly proprietary differentiated products to highly commoditized products, working with passive components, ASICs, image sensors, processors, microcontrollers, virtually any type of every type of integrated circuit you can think of, and have also engaged with companies who sell mostly directly, some more reliant on channel, and many who have a mix of both. So the key point of this slide is that while all these companies may have slightly different strategies in terms of how they negotiate their business, negotiate their prices, negotiate their contracts, Model N Solution and Services have been able to serve virtually every scenario that these companies have been able to throw our way. If we go into the next slide, where it's sort of a quick view of our presence in the distribution space, Model N has actually many distributors around the world who have access to the solution. Virtually all of the top 10 distributors in the world have literally hundreds of users who access Model N for submitting registrations, submitting their inventory data, submitting their point-of-sale data, self-serving our quotes and prices, their credit claims, etc. And we have de facto become an industry standard in the channel business, which is quite important for new companies who start working with us, because when you introduce new solutions and new processes, there is always a learning curve, there is always an adoption curve, and Model N minimizes that significantly because most of the biggest players in the industry, in the channel space, are very familiar with Model N, already use it and utilize it on a daily basis. So we really minimize risk, adoption, and learning curves in that context. On the next slide, we'll sort of summarize this information for you just at a high level. As I mentioned, every possible product line under the sun has been supported by the Model N solutions. We have over $50 billion under management, which means that literally every price that goes into orders, every quote, every contract, every channel incentive, every POS line, every credit claim gets handled by our system. We have over 50,000 users in the industry, in the departments of sales, sales operations, field application engineers, finance, and marketing. And we are also extended outside the firewall to manufacturing reps and distribution users. As I mentioned earlier on, there are quite a few distribution users on the Model N system. There are over 1,000 distribution companies in 50 countries who utilize Model N. They're not the Model N customers. It's actually our customers who are opening up the system to the distribution for use. From software partnerships on the back end, most of our deployments are integrated with SAP and Oracle, and we have standardized connectors to those solutions. On the front end, we have actually quite a few native applications built on the Salesforce1 platform, and we are OEM partners of Salesforce.com. Our Rebate sales solution, which is the only CRM solution built for the semiconductor space, is built on that platform, licensing their technology. And last but not least, we do have an OEM partnership also with Click, where we embed their solution to visualize all the analytics of the data in our systems. So that's a quick overview of Model N and our customers and our presence in the marketplace, and I do encourage you all to visit our website and learn more. We go to the next slide. You can see here a high-level overview of the footprint the Model N provides. On the right-hand side, you see Rebate Sales, again, our CRM solution for semiconductor companies that allows sales reps to manage everything from a lead through to an opportunity, through to samples, built from the ground up and out of the box for the needs of the semiconductor industry, fully supporting multiple forecasting periods and opportunities, multiple purchasing entities like contract manufacturers, distributors, and ODMs, and fully integrated with our revenue management suite, which includes our deal management application, which handles pricing, global pricing, and quoting and contracts, our deal analytics, which is to rationalize and drive price concessions based on data and pricing trends, and our channel management application, which handles everything from the ship and debit process, point of sale management, inventory management, channel contracts, etc., and then our Rebate application, which is an incentive program to drive purchasing behavior of customers, contract manufacturers, and disties. So that is the entire suite of what Model N brings to the market. And with that, let's get into today's topic, which is, how can you drive additional growth beyond what the market average performance is going to look like. So when we look at the outlook for 2016, you look at the World Semiconductor Trade Statistics Organization, their prediction for the remainder of 2015 is that the year will end at 3.4% growth, similar growth in 2016, and 3% growth in 2017. If you subscribe to IHS data, you might see a 5% growth for next year. So there's a gap there between 3.4 to 5%. But at the end of the day, this is not stellar growth. This is relatively as close as you can get to being flatline in terms of industry performance. And to add to that, the JP Morgan GSA Semiconductor Index, which was published earlier this month, fell to an all-time low, at least compared to the last previous 12 months. And for those of you not familiar with this index, it's actually an interesting one because it is surveying the level of confidence of the CEOs and CFOs of semiconductor companies in a very broad way, and it gives you an overall industry indication on how confident the leadership of these companies are with regard to their ability to grow the business. And the key drivers for the relatively low assessments and low confidence level of the C-level suites of these companies is, number one, that we've had lower than expected bookings in the previous quarter, and then the overall demand for 2016 seems to be soft, seems to be a softening trend. And our claim is that despite this outlook, there are companies who can and will beat the industry averages, and they'll be doing it by paying close attention exactly to how much money they're leaving on the table by their own doing. It's not by the market pressure. It's not by the customer or disty pressure. It's by the things that they're doing internally. And that's what we're going to be focusing on in the rest of today's presentation. So as we go to the next slide, as basically some companies will be asking themselves, is this the right time to make investments in infrastructure and in process improvements, or is this the time to cut back and wait for better times? And the typical response is that a lot of companies will go and say, well, if it isn't absolutely necessary, then let's just not do it, and we'll wait for the better times. However, we believe, and we're witnessing this, that the forward thinkers, the market drivers, are currently doubling down on process improvements, infrastructure improvements that can help them outperform the market. Most of these companies are saying, since we're anyway faced with either flat or potentially down times, this is actually an excellent time to make an investment. And when the market starts picking up, even in a downtime, we can outperform the market performance or the market averages in terms of growth. And Model N has actually seen a significant uptake in the last 3 to 6 months in the number of inquiries and the number of companies who are generating new projects, fully knowing how flat next year is going to look like, or limited growth next year is going to look like, because they believe that they can actually outperform those numbers. So as we go into the next slide, you'll see that we'll focus here on the main areas where we believe money is being left on the table, that money is simply not well negotiated, and that other companies are making money at the expense of the semiconductor company. Starting with the simplest and most obvious one is the volume compliance and upfront discounts. Customers will always do two things. They will always buy exactly how much they really need. However, in the price negotiation, they will say what they need to say in order to get the price down, which normally involves promising very high volumes and then, demanding an upfront discount for those prospective volumes. But when you actually look at the end of the year at the volume that they actually bought, it normally is lower if you were to measure that actual volume consumed against what the price should have been for that volume, based on volume breaks and normal discounts you would do for competitive reasons. You still find a significant amount of money being left on the table. The Aberdeen survey that was done several years ago showed as much as 9% of the negotiated volume discounts is never realized. It's completely lost to these companies, and that is a significant amount of money. We're not saying that all of it can be brought back, and as we talk about strategies, you'll see what we propose and what companies have been able to do, but it is a pretty significant problem. The second aspect of global price visibility and enforcement, basically you have situations where end customer pricing has been negotiated, and yet someone in a different region or in a different channel starts a new price negotiation, and even though it's the same part going to the same customer, there is a new negotiation going on, and it may happen because the disti or the contract manufacturer are claiming that they are aggregators of buying power. It could happen simply because the person that's being asked for that price in that region or that channel is unaware that there is an end customer agreement already in place, because most tools built in-house are not globally enforced. It opens up the opportunity for companies to just reopen those discussions, and we have seen companies consistently ignore the end customer price that they have painstakingly negotiated and go and start giving discounts that are significantly below that when it's still the same part going to that same end customer. And it adds up to significant portions of money. We've seen as much as 2 to 3% of top-line revenue being lost to these issues. And again, it's not real price pressure, it's just an execution process. When you look at discounting controls, especially when you have, again, a lack of true global processes and global tools, we have typically seen companies who will either have different groups bid on business that is outside their region because they can ship to wherever they want to ship to. And that means that they're essentially creating an internal bidding war. And again, it could be inside the company between the different BUs of the different regions, and it can also happen across the channels. In both cases, the discount controls are basically eroding the price for no good reason. The company is being played against itself for these reasons, and again, top-line dollars are lost due to that problem. The enforcement of contracted prices, especially those who contain sometimes more complex arrangements around step pricing, is difficult. Most companies don't have the right infrastructure and process to enforce that consistently, so they do it sporadically. Again, if there's a contracted price, unless it is also tied automatically into the quoting process and into the pricing rules that are driving prices into the quotes, again, that is not always consistently enforced. And I think this is a key thing to understand, that many companies invest in a contract solution or build a quoting solution, and they say, okay, I have the ability to produce a quote. I can capture the customer information, the part information, I can put in the price, I can route it for approvals, hence I have a solution. But most of them don't realize that unless they have a pricing engine sitting underneath that quoting process that is enforcing automatically all the pricing rules are associated with allocation, with contracted prices, with margin agreements associated with design registrations, they are actually not executing their pricing in a consistent way. Every quote is essentially a one-off when it comes around to the execution of price. And last but not least, we have this issue called the long tail. Sometimes we refer to it as toxic pricing, and the implications of that. Essentially, what this really means is that every company has, most companies have the 20-80 rule, which is the top 20% of their customers, and sometimes even less, are driving 80% of their revenue, and the reverse, 80% of their customers are only driving 20% because they tend to be smaller ones. But that opens up several what we call bad behaviors. It is not atypical for us to engage with a company and find that on very small companies that are buying very limited amounts of volume from the company, surely again because of lack of enforcement, they are sometimes able to get pricing that is ridiculously low. It sometimes may even outperform, in other words, be lower than the price that some of your best customers are actually getting for you. That's actually one of the reasons we call it toxic pricing, because if a larger customer finds out that there is a lower price you're dishing out to another customer, they're going to demand it, and essentially it devalues that larger customer. But even if you ignore that aspect and you just look at the price control to that long tail, when you add it up, when you realize how much money is being left on the table for those companies, and I'll give you a real-life example. A $1.4 billion company that we work with in San Jose analyzed, just basically created an artificial line of saying that below a certain number, and let's just say that number was $150,000, that customer is not considered to be a good performer or a material performer for the company. When you just analyze the deals that were being done for customers who are at that level and below in terms of revenue, and you looked at the disproportionate discounts they were getting compared to what they were buying, they did the analysis that had they just put back a little more control on those prices, they were able to drive as much as $28 million to their top line revenue. And I'll come back to that point when it comes to strategies of how you would do that in a few slides. But the point is, all of these things add up to a significant amount of money, and you'll see that in the next slide that we go to. You can see here, this is a sampling of an industry average. This is basically based on surveys done by Aberdeen, Accenture, Gartner, and the Yankee Group. These are all independent surveys that range from as many as 70 and as low as 30 semiconductor companies that participate in these 4 different surveys. And they all came up with a pretty average number. This is the average number that we aggregated across all these surveys, showing that on every $1 billion in sales, as much as $50 million might be left on the table. Now, remember, this is an industry average. Every company might have differences, so that these are not necessarily the right buckets for each company. One company may have more issues with one bucket of volume compliance, and another one may have more issues on discounting control, so it varies across the companies. But as an industry average, this is what we've seen and what has been measured by these independent surveys that I've just mentioned. So all those problems I mentioned earlier on, they add up to significant dollars, which is definitely worthwhile. Again, if you're a $1 billion company leaving potentially 5% of top-line revenue on the table for no real reason other than internal execution and internal controls on the backdrop of an industry that's operating at 3.4% average growth rate. Well, that's really not excusable. And a lot of companies, that's why we're seeing that increase in the number of companies that are really focusing on trying to solve these problems. So let's go to the next slide. And the point that we're trying to get across is that it really is in your company's hands. The issues described before, they're not being driven by the price pressure of a customer or a distributor. It's not Moore's law that is driving your pricing down because everybody expects to get some quote-unquote productivity gains. This is about internal company processes. It's about sales strategy. It's about global capabilities and about the tools that you have. And again, we just put here one anecdotal example. The companies who are applying performance-based discounts rather than upfront-based discounts were able to improve their top-line dollars on those particular deals by as much as 5%. And that is huge. That is huge. It wasn't that the customer necessarily bought more volume. It was just that there was a better correlation between the volume they actually bought and the price that they got. So we'll come back to that as we go into strategies. Going into the next slide. What are the strategies to drive this top-line dollar revenue improvement? And I've started with what we consider to be the lowest hanging fruit, which is the discounts to the long tail. The reason it's easier to do this is because these long tail customers, these relatively low volume, low value customers, are not really in a position to negotiate much. They're not a contract manufacturer, a disti, or one of your key strategic OEM customers that are in a very good position to negotiate and push you down on prices. These people are buying so little that, number one, they don't have the negotiating power. And number two, the real impact to you not yielding to an extreme discount and staying closer to the volume breaks has a relatively small impact on their finances. If we're dealing with a customer that's buying $10,000 a year or $15,000 a year of stuff, and now just by holding them accountable to the volumes that they're buying, or just by not discounting so extremely, they're now paying $16,000 a year or $18,000 a year, it is not a material impact on their business. They will rarely switch vendors because of such a minor change. But when you multiply that by potentially dozens, if not hundreds, and in some cases even thousands of customers, depending on the type of business you're in, it adds up to significant dollars. And so what we've seen is, at the same company I was mentioning earlier on, they actually put a test case in place to prove the point. And basically to all those low-performing customers, they arbitrarily, if the discount they were giving earlier on was, let's say, 15% below the discount volume breaks in the price book, they started giving only 10%. They're still giving a discount, they're still associated with volume, but it just wasn't as extreme. That 5% movement across enough customers, that is what generated those $30 million or $28 million of value to that particular company. And as we go into the demonstration, we'll try and give you some ideas of how easy it is really to set that up. Because essentially, if you do have a global pricing system and a global quoting system sitting on top of it, that is integrated with the ERP, it is an automatic execution process. You don't need even people to touch it. It's easy to see that this customer, based on the ERP data, is a low-performing customer. Then there's a price rule in place that says thou shalt not discount more than 10% below the volume break and start at the volume break price for the first quote turnaround. And it's an automated process. And just by that, it's a very simple process, significant dollars, 2%, 3% of top-line revenue can be brought back. Looking at global visibility and systematic controls over price concessions across every region, every channel, that is essentially, ties to what I've just been talking about, global control over pricing, over price agreements, over quotes, over contract, making sure it is running through one system, making sure there is visibility for the right people, because customers tend to shop in multiple locations. When you silo the different geographies to just see the data in their location, they are blinded to what the customer might be doing in other channels in different locations. But if they can see that a channel is shopping in multiple locations, going to the same end customer, and you may also know through which channel that customer normally chooses to fulfill, you will make the right pricing decisions. Without this global visibility for the right people, it's very difficult to do that. Introducing performance-based pricing, whether you're using step pricing or rebates. The idea that the performance of the customer in association with the volume is tied to the price is difficult sometimes to introduce into companies because, number one, there is the immediate fear that if we introduce this, the customer is going to push back. They may go back and threaten us by going to a competitor, etc. And it is a training and a change management issue of educating the sales organization that, you know what, we will even allow a steeper discount because, again, if you look at the averages, the customers rarely actually live up to the volume commitments. So we may even approve a steeper discount, but as long as it is tied to performance, in other words, as they consume the volume, that's how the price drops. You're not saying no to the customer. You're actually saying yes. The customer, Mr. Customer, you will get the discounted price you're asking for, and it will be dropped as you consume the volume. And and again, you may not do that with all of your customers. You may not do that with your strategic customers and they push back. But if you do it with enough customers, significant numbers, as much as 5% of revenue will come back. The other reason that people push back is that they don't really have the process and the tools in place to create a quote and a price agreement that reflects this, and then be able to enforce that automatically as orders start coming into the ERP. So unless you have an integrated system that can, on the one hand, introduce this deal structure to the customer and make sure that as orders are coming into the ERP, in real time, they're adjusted based on the volumes and the prices, it is a difficult process, and therefore, again, a lot of companies don't fulfill that. Again, we will try and show you how easy it is to do with some of Model N solutions. The next point is rebate incentive programs. I think, again, you can introduce rebates on all product lines. You can introduce rebates to all entities, be it customers and contract manufacturers and distributors. What we find is many companies do this in a sporadic way, very anecdotal. They'll do a few. Again, why are the reasons? Either the customer pushed them to do that because they weren't getting enough discounts that they wanted, or that they are trying to hold the customer accountable to a volume price. But the reason they don't do it consistently is because, again, they do not have the tools, they do not have the process. Very often finance pushes back because the introduction of rebate programs is essentially the creation of a financial liability which needs to be accrued for and then tracked correctly, and the payouts. And since most companies don't believe they can do that well, they push back on it. In fact, we had a roundtable discussion hosted by PwC with 25 semiconductor companies, and all of them uniformly said, and there's people from sales operations, finance, and pricing, all of them uniformly said they would like to do rebate programs more consistently, but finance and their own processes are inhibiting them. So again, we believe, especially when you're dealing with commodity parts, especially when dealing with contract manufacturers and disties who are operating anyway on razor-thin margins, if you introduce an incentive program that gives them another point or another 2 points in margin, they will give you the mind share and the market share and consume more from you. So rebates can be used to shape purchasing behavior and impact market share, which is very valuable. They also have the value, especially with contract manufacturers, of masking the OEM price so that the contract manufacturer buys at a fixed price, and then by identifying the end customer gets paid the rebates, and you're not exposing the OEM price to the contract manufacturer. Last but not least, embedding analytics into the price concession decision process. Many times these discussions are emotional discussions. You have sales pushing back on marketing or on the pricing function, if you have a central one, saying, look, your marketing pricing and your price books back there in the ivory tower have nothing to do with what's happening in the street. In the street, we are fighting against competition. We are under pressure from the customer, and we have to drop this price or we're going to lose the deal. And that is a very emotional discussion. When you embed analytics into that discussion, both sides can see these are the last 200 transactions that we did in a particular region against this competitor through this particular channel. Here are the prices that we won the business at. Here are the prices that we lost. This is our real price regression curve of what the market is willing to bear, and that's the real ASP. And you can rationalize the concession in that context, and very often you find that you may need to drop the price a bit, but you don't have to drop it as far as sales is telling you in order to win the business. And that is a fast way of keeping more margin on your side, and basically, again, more top-line dollars on your side of the equation. So I think that with that, we will move over to. Sorry, I forgot I had another slide here. With that, what are the practical things you can do inside the company? The first thing is building consensus that these are problems, and there is value associated with these issues, that it's worthwhile making a change. Some companies can go and do that themselves if they have the bandwidth and the people available. If not, Model N does offer a 2-day workshop, which is offered at no cost, to help companies do this analysis and uncover where the actual value buckets are and try and quantify them. Make sure that you have the right tools. They need to be global. They need to provide channel access, have pricing rules. Again, just having a receptacle to store quotes in is not really going to drive price execution, consistency, and discount controls. You really need pricing rules underlying the quoting and contracting process to drive this, and they need to be enforced automatically, or again, it becomes a manual process captured in emails and in meetings, and it really isn't scalable and repeatable. Using rebates or step pricing to drive better consumption, better compliance with volume, Model N can help with all those areas. It's important to understand that you need a plan for change. If you are bringing such capabilities into the company, it's not just about software. It's about process change. It's about training salespeople, and it's important to factor that into when you're preparing to do something like that. And some companies listen to all of this and say, okay, I'm going to bring in new tools. I'm going to change my business processes. I'm going to train my salespeople. Is it worth all the noise? Is it worth the pain of going through all of this? And the answer to that is growing 2 to 3% faster than the rest of the market worth it. And again, on the backdrop of the current industry, I think that most companies would say yes. So as we go into the next slide, just one or two things to say about the Model N workshop. The Model N workshop involves reviewing your current processes of opportunities, design registrations, quoting, contract compliance, step pricing if you do them, how you do price concessions, rebates, ship and debit, and credit claims. You don't have to do all of this. Some companies may choose to just focus on pricing, or just focus on the quoting, or just focus on the design registrations. Each company may choose what is important. And then we do a gap and opportunity analysis. And the outcome of this process, if we go to the next slide, is a documented analysis of what are your practices inside the company, tools and processes, versus what are the industry best practices that we've seen across more than 50 companies. So you can compare and contrast how you're performing and benchmark yourself against the rest of the industry and decide the things that you like and the things you may want to change. And we also create a qualitative opportunity analysis of what areas are likely to drive the highest dollar value for your company, and we try and put a dollar sign on those based on the matrix of your business. So again, this entire process the Model N offers is free, and we believe it helps companies figure out what are the value drivers and which ones are the most important ones. I can give you the importance of this is that companies sometimes have tribal knowledge and perceptions, and they discover something new in this process. For example, when we started working with a company about 6 or 8 months ago, they were convinced that because of the discontinuity and disconnect between systems, that between their debit records, their point-of-sale data, the credit claims from the customers, the varying values of inventory, they were convinced that they were paying a lot of money, too much money to the channels, and that they probably shouldn't be doing that. And our process did uncover that they were actually experiencing a $2 million overpayment. But what we also discovered was that because they had absolutely no enforcement of contracted prices or end customer pricing enforced in their quoting process, they were actually leaving as much as $6 to $7 million on the table because of that particular process. And that rearranged their priorities and realized that there was actually a bigger bang for the buck to go and fix something else. So it really is an uncovering process. It's a discovery process that really helps companies focus on where they can get the most value. With that, let me hand over to Jen, who will walk you from the theoretical strategies to some of the practical implications of how that's done in the Model N software. Over to you, Jen.
Thank you, Hanan. All right, so let me actually sign into our environment. Sorry about that. And basically what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to walk through a quote scenario. And during this quote scenario, I'm going to be a salesperson who is logging in to the system and requesting a price that his customer is asking for, and then responding to that quote as appropriate. So let me just log in as Greg. Again, Greg is a salesperson, and he has his customer on the phone and is asking for pricing for some specific products. So let me move over to my quote summary page. And before I actually start quoting this customer, I want to see, have I ever quoted them before? So let me just do a quick search. This is for Celestica and their end customer of IBM. So let me use some searching here. It looks like we've done quite a bit of quoting with Celestica. We've done some with IBM, some with that fruity customer that's out there. But it doesn't look like anything recent, and most of it's gone through distribution. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new quote from scratch. And basically, I have to start by telling the system a little bit of information about what I'm trying to quote. So it's a direct quote that we're doing, and I need to identify who the purchasing customer is. So you'll see in this list here, these are all the customers in my territory that I can quote. And it is based on territory. So if I am responsible for just the Bay Area, when I go and do searches, I will only be able to see those customers that are in my territory. So let me select Celestica San Jose. And once I do that, I see all of the existing customers that are currently going through Celestica San Jose. So I'm going to choose IBM New York as my end customer. And I have the option of linking this to a known project or program that we're already working on. But for the interest of this scenario, I'm just going to continue forward. We can identify things such as what currency this is going to be quoted in, what's the start date of this particular item. And then down in this section here, I have the option of creating a matrix quote. So this is a quote that is pricing over periods of time and quantity breaks. So I'm going to define that we're going to do a 5-period quote matrix, and it's a yearly quote. So let me continue forward from here. The next thing I need to do is provide the parts that I want to do a quote for. If I had a large list of parts, I could import them in, but in this case I'm just going to go in and select some parts from our catalog. And when I go to the catalog, you'll see a list of parts. We can see some basic information such as descriptions and some basic pricing around these parts. So for this customer, they're asking for 4 parts. So let's select these 4 and bring them back into the quote. And the next thing I need to do is provide some quantities. So I'm just going to enter in 50,000 for each of these. And really quick here. And I really only want the matrix quote for the very last line item. So I'm going to turn off the matrix on the other 3. The next thing I'm going to do is hit the quote button. And at this point, the pricing engine is going to engage. And it's going to determine what pricing do I return for this scenario. So what pricing do I return for the direct scenario for Celestica San Jose with the end customer of IBM New York for these given parts. And it's going to go through some logic. It's going to determine, are any of these parts on allocation? Because if they are, we don't want to return a price automatically. We want to actually look at the business and determine if we can support it. It's going to go and look to see, do we have a contract? And it could be a contract for Celestica, or it could be a contract for IBM. If it is for IBM, is it actually extended to Celestica? So are they authorized to get this pricing? If there's no contract price, then we're going to look to see, is there any pricing rules that may be in play? And pricing rules allows your company to be able to define systematic pricing for certain scenarios. So for example, you may have a rule that says if the customer is a customer that we are not focusing on, so it's a non-strategic customer, I just want to return book pricing and nothing else. But if the customer is a strategic customer, I may want to return a price that is actually more in line with our field min or our strategic min. So you can set up these conditions that will automatically return a price and eliminate people from having to do busy work of responding to every single quote. The last step it goes through is to just return quantity break pricing if there's nothing else that applies. So let's see what happens here. So I'm going to click on the quote button. And first of all, we see that pricing is returned automatically. And let's go through and look at this pricing and see what we have. So the first part, we see that the price is $375 that was returned. Now if I look a little further, I see that this price is actually linked in to an opportunity that we could be working on. And it's also linked to a contract. And based on my authority levels, I can actually drill into that contract and see the specifics around it. So we can see that this contract was actually created for IBM New York. It is approved that all distributors get this contract price, but only Celestica has authorization to get this pricing as a CM or an EMS. We can see that this pricing is actually a matrix contract or a step pricing, as Hanan was mentioning before. And our current contract price is $375. So that means that they have actually consumed against this contract, and they're now in the fourth step of this matrix pricing. So that means that they have consumed over 50,000 pieces, and they're currently enjoying a $3.75. So as Hanan was mentioning, this allows you to control the discounts that you're going to give to your customer. Yes, Mr. Customer, we'll give you this million-piece pricing, but you have to earn it before you actually get it. This also is showing how contract pricing is enforced. One of the things that Hanan was talking about is when you have disparate systems and disparate regions, you may negotiate a contract for a specific customer, and a different region who should be using this contract price may not know that that price is available for them. So one of the things that we do very well is we allow the contracts to be used as needed. So that's the first pricing. If I go to the second price, we can see that we got a price of $7.08. It is linked to an existing opportunity. The third price is $9.58, and there's nothing that it's linked to. The fourth one, we see our matrix pricing. So we can see what was initiated, and because it's initial pricing, we're not giving a lot of discounts until somebody has a chance to look at this quote. So I'm very happy with the first pricing, but the second and third price, I do want better pricing. It's not sufficient for my customer. So I'm going to actually request for a better price. So at this point, I select the parts, I click on Requote, and now I have to provide additional information as to why I need this better price. So for the first one, we have a target of $650. And the reason we have this target is because there is a competitor who is out there and offering a $650 price. So I'm going to put in who the competitor is and their part number. The second one is a $7 target, and that's because we have a design target that we're looking to meet on this particular item. Okay, so once we've completed the additional information, I'm going to go ahead and click on the Requote button. Once again, the pricing engine is going to engage, and it's going to determine if there is a better price that it can give based on the new conditions that have been entered. So let's go ahead and requote it, and let's see what happened. So here's our second part. We had a requote price that came back of $650. So in this case, the system was actually able to meet my target. It could have been that there is a rule in place that would have allowed the system to go down to, say, $550. But because we had a target of $650, the system said, hey, great, I can actually meet that $650 and I don't need to go down to the price of $550. So therefore, we're not leaving money on the table by actually meeting the customer's target and not dropping pricing to the lowest price available. So second part, we're happy with the price. Third part we look at, we had a target of $7, but the actual price that was returned is $8. So while we did give a discount between the original pricing and the second pass pricing, we didn't actually meet the target. So at this point, no other person has been involved in actually returning the pricing. The manufacturer has gone to the system and said, okay, these are the rules that we're putting in place. The system was able to return pricing based on those rules. And at this point, our salesperson says, hey, I now need somebody to be involved in these last two pieces for pricing. So I'm going to select them and submit them to our workflow. And he can go about his day doing all of the other sales work that he has to do. So what I'm going to do now is log in as Debbie, and Debbie is a marketing person who has authority to review pricing and determine what price should be returned. So let me log in. First thing I see is that Greg has requested a review of a quote that he has entered. So I can drill into that quote. And I see some information already in place. So first of all, the first two line items are not requested for better pricing, so I understand that the system was able to return a price that was sufficient for our customer. And I can see also that this first line was linked to a contract, so that's great. So let me just collapse these two so I can take a look at the third part. So this particular line item is something that I need to review. I can see that the customer gave me a target of $7 and that the system actually returned a price of $8. So before I actually decide if I want to return $7 price, I want to see what kind of a performance that this customer has. So let me click on this customer analytics tool here. All right, so I can see here that this first panel is my driver of the following three panels. I can see that we're looking at this customer in the last 12 months. This customer belongs to our corporate ID of IBM Worldwide. They are a silver customer, so this is an important customer in my database. I can see the revenue and profit that the customer is bringing in as far as the corp ID, as well as this specific location of this customer. And I can see the revenue and profit trends. So the first part of the year, they actually weren't doing much business with us, but in the last few months, they've started really producing and buying more product from us. So this gives me a feel of what type of customer this is. Next thing I want to do is look to see, have I ever quoted this $7 price before? So let me quickly click on this View Pricing tab. This shows me what my pricing table is for this particular part and what my manufacturer cost is around here. Next, I want to go back and look to see, have I ever quoted this price to this customer before? And I can see here that while I've had this target price come up several times, we've not actually returned a $7 price for this customer before. Lastly, I want to go in and analyze this particular quote. So let me click on the Deal Analytics. And basically, I am looking at a price scatter chart for this particular customer. So I can see where the customer has asked for the pricing of $7. I can see, if you can tell, there's a little yellow dot here that's the actual price that the system has returned. I can see any quotes that have already been done for this particular customer and part. And I can see if I've won it or if it's still pending. So this gives me some good information, but I want to see, have I ever quoted this part before at $7. And I'm going to just change some of my parameters really quick. And now you can see I have a lot more quotes that I'm looking at. So if I zoom in a little bit, I can see that we have actually done quite a bit of quoting around this part before. I have gone down to the $7 price before for similar quantities. But let's see, if I look over here, I can see that the lowest price that we've actually given this customer or given out is $480 or $490. So I've got a lot of information here to determine if I actually want to return this $7 price. So if I want to go in and look at a specific quote, I can see that this quote, where we did give a much lower price than $7, is actually for a key customer of ours that we have that I know we have a MFN in place with. So we gave them a $490 price, which I know I need to stay far away from so I don't get us in trouble with. So as I go through and look at this, I don't actually want to meet the $7 pricing, but I do want to give a concession. So I'm going to give them a $7.50 price, and I'm going to add it back into the quote. And I'm now going to approve this particular line. So basically what I've shown you is, oops, forgot to approve it here, select it and approve it. I've shown you today how we have done consistent pricing globally. So we created a contract for a customer in New York, but when my customer in San Jose is doing the quote, they're getting the correct pricing for this particular customer, regardless of where they are in the world. I've shown you how you can see pricing globally to make sure that you're actually returning a price that is not going to erode your pricing margins. I've showed you how contracts can be created and enforced. And then based on the customer of silver, I can do controls over not giving out too high of a price and not giving out too low of a price, but a price that is appropriate for this customer level. So that's all I have to show you today. Kishore, do you want to take over now?
Yes, thank you very much, Jen, and Hanan, thanks again. So are there any questions from our attendees at this point? Like I said, feel free to use the chat window. So there is one question that I'd like to start with, Hanan. So again, thanks for the presentation. One takeaway that I saw from the demo is the customer says that it looks like a cloud-based solution. Can you please confirm that, and how long does it take to implement the solution?
Right. So we didn't call this out, but the Model N solution is obviously browser-based, so you don't need to install anything. We do deliver it through the cloud. The Model N Revenue Management Cloud is where most of our most recent deployments, whether it's companies like Fairchild and Freescale and Intel and Maxim and many, many others are running their business now. In the past, we actually did have an on-premise solution, so Model N today is 100% delivered via cloud subscription. And the second question is a little harder to answer, which is how long does it take to implement, because that is dependent on multiple factors. Number one, there are multiple applications the Model N has to offer. There's quoting, there's pricing, contracts, there's the CRM, Rebate sales solution, there is our channel management solution. So that's one component. The second component is how many configurations the customers needs to do and the type of integrations they need to do on the back end. So having put that disclaimer up front, if you're looking for our average numbers, looking for implementation of quoting and pricing, the shortest implementation that we've done that I know of to date was about 8 weeks, and the longest one was 11 weeks. Very typical, it'll be between 5 to 6 weeks. So that may range. Those are the ranges that I can give for companies to have some context.
Okay, thank you. So another question that's coming through is the following, which is, there is genuine disbelief in my company that we can do much about pricing, with customers constantly renegotiating prices multiple times a year. How do I get my executives to even listen to this?
That's a very fair point. So I think that you have to have a multi-stage strategy here. First of all is you got to build the credibility that it can actually be done. So I think that a lot of people mistakenly feel that doing something about pricing somehow means increasing pricing or not giving away discounts. And we're not saying either of these things. Although, by the way, both are doable, but we're not actually promoting either one of these. What we're talking about is when you are discounting, how are you discounting? Are you giving it up front or are you giving it against actual performance? When you're discounting, are you discounting because there is genuine price pressure, or because somebody is just trying to close a deal quickly in a certain quarter to make their number? There are different aspects to the execution of pricing. And so creating the credibility that, number one, this is what we're not talking about. We're not talking about increasing pricing or not giving discounts. We're talking about doing those things in a smart way. And here are examples of companies who have been able to do that. And Model N has 9 public case studies of various companies who have been extremely kind to us and have agreed to share this sort of information online. And you can see the performance impact. And the second thing then is to go into the next level of detail and say, okay, here's what we can do. Okay, here's how we can use either rebates with our disties or contract manufacturers, or use a matrix price like the one that Jen just showed to make sure we are giving them the discounts, but we're giving it as they consume the volume. Or another thing is when we are conceding on pricing, that there is analytics to support why we're giving those price discounts. When you're able to show those things, I think that it becomes a much more credible solution, a much more credible discussion.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much again, Hanan. And that actually brings us at the top of the hour. And so I'd like to thank all of our attendees for their time. Hopefully this presentation by Hanan and Jen was useful. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us. Again, thank you, Hanan and Jen. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.